911 calls reveal the chaos and very dangerous situations at a massive field party earlier this month in Orange County. Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Megan Glova. We're joined now by WRAL Investigates Sarah Krueger. Sarah, what more did we learn from these calls?
Yeah, so these calls are about a May 2nd party that was out at Smokehouse Valley Farm in Orange County and Cedar Grove. We have reported extensively on these farm parties, and not just there, but really all over. We've done stories about Durham County. We know some of these happen in Person County as well, and now Orange County. And the Orange County Sheriff had put out a news release about this party because there had been 2,500 people there, according to him. And just, really causing just mass chaos for people who live nearby, for first responders. That resulted in the owner of the property, Dwight Pool, actually getting charged related to some underage drinking charges. So I had then filed a public records request for these 911 calls because the sheriff had said in his news release that there were roughly 70 calls for help. So I wanted to hear more about those and reached out to the county, and then they sent me a list of all of those calls with descriptions, and then I got the audio of some of those calls as well. And it just really highlights how far-reaching this chaos was, and in so many different ways. I mean, from medical emergencies to traffic issues, just to neighbors calling saying, what's the racket? I can't sleep. But just, wow, it sounds like it was a wild scene out there.
Yeah, and speaking of medical emergencies, something interesting I saw in your story was a situation with a pregnant woman. What did you learn about her story?
Yes, as someone who has 2 young kids, so very familiar with being pregnant, this one really stood out to me. There was a 911 call was about a pregnant woman who was having contractions, and she could not get out of her driveway near the venue because multiple cars had blocked her in. And oh my gosh, I just cannot imagine. So the 911 call was saying like, hey, can we get some tow trucks out here because we got to go. So I hope that she's well. I hope that the baby is well. But gosh, that was one example. There was another call about someone having an asthma attack. There was another call about people passed out in the road. Lots of calls about the underage drinking that was involved out here. People saying, the road was barely passable because people were parking on both sides of this, rural country road that's not very wide. So just creating a lot of really dangerous situations.
Yeah, very scary. And what kind of strain did this put on law enforcement? Did we get any insight there?
Yeah, so I interviewed the Orange County Sheriff prior to this party, actually, but just about this very issue since I have been covering it for a while. And that was one of the things that he really stressed to me in that interview is that these farm parties are such a strain on their resources. And I mean, you think about 70 plus 911 calls, that's a huge strain on the dispatchers, on telecommunicators, and then for the deputies who responded, I mean, that's just, pulling a lot of people to one like very remote area. And we know that it wasn't just Orange County Sheriff's Office deputies that responded. It was from other agencies as well, but a total of 25 officers had to go out there. When we're talking about 2,500 people, you need a lot of officers. You don't want to be too outnumbered.
And, you also spoke with some folks trying to put a stop to parties like these. What are their concerns and what did they have to say?
Yeah, so I talked to 2 women, Samantha Liu and Guyon Chambliss, and they are both with nonprofits in Orange County that are really focused on underage drinking and the harms of underage drinking and preventing that. This is something that's been on their radar for a really long time, since about 2018. They said that then these parties kind of started to die off during the pandemic, but now are making a resurgence. And they just have a lot of concerns about these parties because of the magnitude of people there, the magnitude of alcohol that's often there. These are very often college students that are at these parties. And then one really big concern is just how rural, how remote this is. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if there is an emergency with a college student at a bar, let's say like downtown on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. Yeah, there's a lot of people around. There's help around quickly. But the situation at a lot of these types of parties is there's very little cell phone service. Actually, at this Smokehouse Valley Farm in particular, when I got out there, I was trying to call my photographer just to coordinate meeting him, and I couldn't even make a call on my phone.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and I was, in listening to the 911 calls that I received, it helped explain, like, okay, yeah, there were a lot of times the calls just cut out. And even the dispatchers were saying, like, we're having bad signal issues. We can't hear you. So that's just, one concern they have is, like, how hard it would be to get help. And then also just the environment around there of sometimes students then maybe, like, walking, trying to find cell phone signal and walking down these dimly lit, dark, winding roads. So just a lot of very scary elements there.
You did mention Pool. What can you tell us about his arrest and where does that stand?
So ALE is the one who charged Dwight Pool, and he's facing a number of counts of charges related to aiding and abetting underage drinking. He's due in court next week on the 29th. And I have been in touch with him and his family, and initially they wanted to do an interview, actually said they wanted to do a press conference to give their side of the story, later backed out on that, told me that he was planning to speak to a public county commissioners meeting, so I was waiting to see if that would happen this week, which it has not so far. So we haven't heard all too much from him. I did also find I was going through court records and noticed that several attendees of this party were also charged related to underage drinking, and some of them driving while impaired. And one that really stood out to me was someone who had a blood alcohol content of 0.19.
Oh, my gosh.
Which is really high, yeah, more than twice the legal limit. So,
and just for some background and clarification, is Pool hosting these parties, or he's just allowing them to happen on his property?
So I guess, maybe we don't exactly know like what he would consider his role to be, but he's the owner of the property. And this property is one that has been on our radar as a news station and on law enforcement's radar for some time. We covered out there in 2018. There was a shooting at a Halloween party at his property that resulted in 2 people getting shot, one of them fatally, and that 18-year-old girl died from her injuries. So I was not the reporter. I was here at the time. I was not the reporter to cover that story, so I was watching back that press conference. And it was interesting in that news conference, our reporter at the time, Sloan Heffernan, was asking him if he accepts any responsibility for what happened at the party that night, and he said he does not. And his wife jumped in then to talk about how they can't be held responsible for people who are bringing in alcohol, that they may not know about that. So that was, helpful context to understand sort of the history of this property.
Sure. And just, speaking of those party goers, talked a lot about underage drinking, but are there any specific charges that any of them faced?
Yeah, so they faced charges, several of them for underage drinking, and then I think it was 2 of them for DWI, and that one that was the 0.19 is the one that just really, stood out to me. But it was ALE, again, alcohol law enforcement, who charged those individuals as well. And I know some of the initial stories I've been doing about farm parties were primarily Duke students who were renting these various farms. In this case, based on the 911 call log, it appears it was not Duke students. It was students from a university in the Greensboro area. And yeah, one other interesting thing I just remembered from the call log is there were a number of people, family members, who called 911 seeing that their child or their sibling was out in this, seemingly middle of a field. I imagine they probably track them on Find My iPhone.
Right.
And so some of the calls to 911 were about that, hey, I just saw my, child is at this place. Do you know what's going on? Because they're not answering their phone. And so then the dispatchers, according to the log, would tell them, yeah, there's a party out there and there's not really cell phone signal. So that's probably why they're not answering.
Gotcha.
So.
Yeah, mine kind of goes worst case
Yes.
scenario in that situation. Well, we'll end with just jumping back to Pool. What are we exactly expecting from his court appearance?
Yeah, so this will just be his, kind of routine appearance, and I expect that he will probably be there, but in these initial appearances, sometimes it's actually just the attorney who's there on the defendant's behalf. We're definitely planning to keep a close eye on it, and hopefully he'll be open to sharing his perspective as well, and if so, we would love to hear it.
Okay, we'll be looking for that. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You can find more podcasts from WRAL News at WRAL.com. Search podcast. From sports to true crime, there are plenty of shows to keep you informed and entertained. I'm Megan Glova. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.